Welcome. This is Course 4, Neuromotor Function and Social Cognition, Week 6, a neurodevelopmental lens, putting new knowledge to work. This week we have two main learning objectives. The first is to apply knowledge and vocabulary related to social thinking, and you will do that primarily through your Part 3 of your learning activity assignment that's due at the end of this week. And in that assignment, you'll be asked to draw on your knowledge of your target students' affinities, strengths, and challenges in the areas of social cognition and neuromotor function in particular, but not exclusively, in order to identify demands embedded in lessons or learning tasks and to modify or create a lesson or learning task that would be most supportive of that student. And your second learning objective is to think about your knowledge of social thinking in the context of the other constructs. So really this week we're going to feature and focus in on ways to use the full neurodevelopmental framework that we've presented to you over the course of this year to think about ways to support students in your classroom or design a classroom that is supportive of students developing their own understanding of themselves as learners and space for them to develop their own strengths and interests as well. So in the next two slides, I'm going to offer you a set of guiding principles for adopting this kind of strength-based approach to supporting students using the neurodevelopmental framework that we've presented. As I share the principles with you, I just want to encourage you to think specifically about how the ideas I'm sharing could come to life in your direct work. So you might want to ask yourself a few questions. One might be, what would this idea look like in my classroom? Another, are there ways I could modify my own existing routines to emphasize a more strength-based approach to teaching and learning? And which activities or tasks might you think of that would help to advance these ideas? Those are just things to keep in mind as I'm sharing these principles with you on the next two slides, because it can be very helpful to bring them to life through thinking about them in terms of your actual practice and work with kids. Okay, so the ideas on this slide are focused on developing positive mindsets for learning, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each one in order. So the first is something that came up when we were talking about neuromotor function initially in the first 3 weeks of the course, and that's really about embracing neurodevelopmental diversity. So by teachers acknowledging and closely investigating individual students' unique learning profiles, strengths, and needs, they can really move beyond this idea of thinking about students in terms of deficits, weaknesses, or areas of challenge, and instead start thinking about identifying relative strengths that can support students in gaining a deeper understanding of themselves as learners. So by taking that mindset approach to the classroom, it's amazing how those strengths that students do have, even within a student who has severe challenges that present in terms of accomplishing learning tasks, those students have strengths as well, and by focusing in on identifying them, a lot of kind of new ideas for ways to support a student in strengthening their strengths or in strengthening areas of weakness are available and made available. So with this idea of a positive mindset for learning, it can begin with embracing neurodevelopmental diversity and then focus in on strengthening student strengths and strengthening students' weaknesses. In addition, the idea of cultivating students' interests and affinities is really important because it offers students opportunities to develop their own expertise and skill. And this is important for all children, but really especially for those with significant struggles, because gaining mastery in an area of interest can be so crucial for persistence through challenging tasks and for interest in participating in school and being a part of the learning activities that are going on in general. Okay. On this slide, we're really going to think about the ideas of specificity and observation. So as we've started to talk about in terms of thinking about which construct might be most at play with a student's struggle, something that can be extremely helpful when thinking about these constructs in the full neurodevelopmental framework is to think about labeling the phenomena as opposed to people. So we want to think about if a student is struggling with social thinking or social behaviors, we want to observe the phenomenon of the breakdown of that student social interaction as opposed to thinking of a student as someone who's socially challenged or socially awkward. The reason is if you think about the phenomena instead of the person, it starts to make available thinking about the connection between the assigned task, for example, as we were talking about last week, choices for grouping, pairing, and the demands embedded in group work. You can start to think about the way those demands connect with a student's skills and interests, and think about it in terms of it as a phenomenon of learning as opposed to a student who's not able to connect socially. So that's a really key feature of working with the neurodevelopmental framework that I want you to please keep in mind as much as possible. These other next two bullet points, helping learners learn about learning and demystification, are really connected ideas, and they're also extremely important for students to be able to build up their own sense of competence, independence, and mastery in the classroom, not just during the time that they're in your classroom, but moving forward for themselves as learners in life. So one way to start with that is to demystify what learning looks like for an individual. So for students to really start to get a handle on their own areas of challenge, their own weaknesses potentially in school-based tasks as they connect to the constructs, and also their relative strengths and interests. So the more that students themselves can learn about what works for them, what doesn't work for them, the kinds of supports that are helpful, the kinds of tasks that are most challenging, and to the extent that they're able to start to articulate that with you, with their family, and to be able to articulate that moving forward, that really starts to build up a sense of independence for them that they're going to be able to carry with them throughout their lives. Related to those two ideas is this notion of a collaboration among professionals, parents, and students. And I believe we talked about this in the early weeks of the course when we were talking about bypassing neuromotor challenges or working on those challenges, and do we want to use technology supports for students with a graphomotor weakness, or do we want to practice writing? And having a shared agreement among professionals, parents, and students about the courses of action that are most supportive for a student can make a huge impact in supporting a student's development and growth. Whereas without collaboration, it can even happen that the ideas and suggestions among professionals, parents, and sometimes students, but mostly professionals and parents, can conflict. And in those cases, that can make things actually more difficult for a student when there are multiple adults making an effort to support a student, but those efforts are not aligned. It can actually have the reverse effect, right, of making life much more challenging. So by thinking about getting really specific and observing students in what they're capable of and challenged with, we can start to open up the ideas of gaining the ability to really articulate what's going on and design tasks that address students' learning needs. And finally, on this slide, I'm going to just talk for a couple minutes about the idea of being a charismatic adult in the lives of young people, and this will be reflected in your assigned reading for this week, which is called A Therapeutic Environment Called School, and it's written by Dr. Robert Brooks. It's a short reading, but I believe it's quite powerful. And he introduces this idea of a charismatic adult in that reading, and it's really defined very simply as an adult from whom a child or adolescent is able to gather strength. The thing that's important about this idea of being a charismatic adult is that it highlights the opportunities that educators have to become an empowering presence for the students with whom we work. So through a classroom interaction, a conversation in the hallway, or as an adult involved in some area of affinity or relative strength, like an after-school program or sports, we can become these adults that are really sources of strengths for students, particularly students with significant struggles and challenges, but for all students in general. And with that in mind, it's helpful to start approaching school and thinking about school itself as a potentially therapeutic environment that can help students build their strengths, their confidence, and inspire them to persist and move forward in their learning aggressively and with verve. So the thing about that I think is important to think about as teachers is that there are these micro interactions that happen ongoingly throughout the day. So, there's opportunities when students face challenge or when they face success for adults to really offer supports to students as an individual and a learner that matters. And so starting to think of yourself as through the interactions that you have with kids as an important figure for them can open up these ideas of what it might look like to be a charismatic adult from whom they derive strength. And I find personally that notion of being that person for kids is really helpful for knowing in those moments of difficulty with students what to say and how to be with them. When you think about the gravity of your words in relationship to them, it starts to help you think of ways to support students by helping them build up their own strengths and knowledge of themselves as people that matter and also people that have things to work on, as we all do. Okay. And finally, for this week, you have 2 assignments. You have a discussion forum based on your reading, A Therapeutic Environment, called School. So you'll get a chance to interact with other colleagues about their perspectives on school as this kind of environment that can support more than just the learning objectives of lessons and curriculum. And finally, you'll have your learning activity assignment, part 3, where you'll be asked to create or modify an existing task with your target student in mind. And I highly encourage you to think about ways to modify tasks or to offer activities that would support your target student but also would have value for the class as a whole, so that you can have a chance to look for ways to address your whole class that you're teaching through attention to the particular needs of students in the room. Okay, so if you have any questions at all about what I've just said or your assignment, I encourage you highly to please contact me individually via email or to come to the GoToMeeting session on Wednesday and bring your questions then. I'll be more than happy to answer them with all of us there, and my guess is that they would be ones that others would benefit from hearing as well. Until Wednesday, I hope you have a great couple days, and I will look forward to seeing you later in the week. Bye-bye.